This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.
In the heart of Verona, a bitter feud simmered between two noble families. The Capulets and the Montagues, locked in a generations-old conflict, poisoned the very air of the city with their hatred. The sun beat down mercilessly on the cobblestone streets, its heat seeming to fuel the tension that crackled through the air. The scent of fresh bread from nearby bakeries mingled with the acrid smell of sweat and anger as citizens hurried past, their eyes darting nervously between the gathering crowds of Capulets and Montagues. A sharp word, a misplaced glare, that was all it took. In an instant, the square erupted into chaos. Steel rang against steel, the metallic tang of blood mixing with the dust kicked up by shuffling feet. Shouts and curses filled the air, drowning out the startled cries of onlookers. Benvolio, a young Montague with a shock of dark hair and worried eyes, pushed his way through the throng. His heart raced, palms slick with sweat as he searched desperately for a way to stem the tide of violence. "Peace!" he cried, his voice barely audible above the din. "Can we not end this madness?" But his words fell on deaf ears. From the crowd emerged Tybalt, his Capulet rival, eyes blazing with a fury that seemed to scorch the very air around him. "Peace!" Tybalt spat, his lip curling in disgust. "I hate the word as I hate hell, all Montagues and thee." With a flick of his wrist, his blade flashed in the sunlight, and the fight erupted anew. The citizens of Verona, long weary of this endless feud, poured into the square. Their cries of frustration and anger rose above the clash of steel, a cacophony that seemed to shake the very foundations of the city. Suddenly, a hush fell over the crowd. The fighters froze, their blades suspended mid-strike. Prince Aeschylus strode into view, his face a mask of cold fury. The air itself seemed to still at his approach. The only sound the soft clink of his guards' armor as they fanned out behind him. "Rebellious subjects, enemies to peace." The prince's voice boomed across the square, each word sharp as a dagger. "On pain of torture, from those bloody hands throw your mistempered weapons to the ground." The fighters, chastened, lowered their swords. The clatter of steel on stone echoed through the now silent square. Prince Aeschylus's decree rang out, clear and uncompromising. Any further violence between the two families would be met with the ultimate punishment, death. The crowd dispersed, murmuring, leaving behind a tense silence, broken only by the soft cooing of pigeons returning to the square. As the last rays of sunlight painted the buildings in shades of gold and crimson, Lord and Lady Montague approached Benvolio. Their faces were etched with worry, not for the fight, but for their son. "Have you seen Romeo today?" Lady Montague asked, her voice trembling slightly. "We fear he's not himself." Benvolio shook his head, about to reply when a figure appeared at the edge of the square. Romeo, his shoulders slumped and his eyes downcast, walked slowly towards them. Lord and Lady Montague exchanged a glance before quietly retreating, leaving Benvolio to speak with his cousin. "Romeo, what sorrow lengthens your hours?" Benvolio asked gently, placing a hand on Romeo's shoulder. The touch seemed to startle Romeo from his reverie, his eyes lifting to meet Benvolio's gaze. "Not having that, which having makes them short," Romeo replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken pain. As they walked together through the now quiet streets, Romeo's story unfolded. He spoke of Rosalind, a girl who had captured his heart but sworn to remain chaste. His words painted a picture of a love so deep and so hopeless that it had become a weight, dragging him down into melancholy. Alas, that love, so gentle in his view, should be so tyrannous and rough in proof. Romeo sighed. The setting sun cast long shadows across his face, deepening the lines of sorrow etched there. Benvolio listened, concern etched on his face. As Romeo's tale of unrequited love came to an end, the city settled into an uneasy quiet. The day's violence gave way to the soft murmur of evening. But in Romeo's heart, the turmoil continued. As night fell, casting the streets in deep shadows, Benvolio's mind raced. He couldn't bear to see his friend suffer so. A plan began to form in his mind, a way to lift Romeo from his melancholy. Little did he know, this simple idea would set in motion events that would shake the very foundations of Verona. Romeo's friends Benvolio and Mercutio had a mission on their minds. They were determined to lift Romeo's spirits and help him forget about Rosalind, the object of his unrequited affections. The streets of Verona hummed with an electric energy, the air thick with anticipation. Word of a grand masquerade ball at the Capulet house spread like wildfire, setting tongues wagging and hearts racing. Benvolio's eyes sparkled with mischief as an idea took root. "This is our chance," he declared, a grin spreading across his face like a cat who'd caught the canary. "We'll crash the party and show Romeo there's more to life than moping over one girl." Mercutio, never one to miss an opportunity for theatrics, clutched his chest dramatically. "Oh, Romeo, Romeo," he cried, his voice dripping with mock anguish. "Wherefore art thou so lovesick?" His antics drew a reluctant chuckle from their melancholy friend, the sound as rusty as an old gate hinge. Romeo stood apart, his shoulders slumped as if carrying the weight of the world. His eyes, usually bright with passion, were now dull and unfocused, staring at something only he could see. The very air around him seemed heavier, saturated with the bitter tang of heartache. But as Benvolio painted a vivid picture of the ball, the swirling kaleidoscope of colors, the infectious laughter, the intoxicating music, a tiny spark flickered to life in Romeo's eyes. It was faint, barely there, but it was enough. Perhaps you're right," Romeo conceded, his voice barely above a whisper, as fragile as a butterfly's wing. "If nothing else, I might catch a glimpse of Rosalind from afar." Meanwhile, across town, the Capulet household was a hive of frenzied activity. Servants darted to and fro like startled fish, hanging rich tapestries, polishing silverware until it gleamed like starlight, and arranging elaborate floral centerpieces that filled the air with a heady perfume. The kitchens were alive with the sizzle and pop of roasting meats, the sweet scent of pastries mingling with savory aromas in a mouth-watering symphony. Lord Capulet, a man whose very presence seemed to fill a room, strode through the chaos like a general surveying his troops. His booming voice echoed off the stone walls, making even the sturdiest servant jump. "More candles in the great hall," he commanded, his eyes critically assessing every detail. "This ball must outshine all others in Verona's memory." As if summoned by the thought of memory and legacy, a distinguished gentleman approached. Count Paris, every inch the picture of nobility, from his perfectly coiffed hair to his expensive jewel-toned doublet, bowed low before Lord Capulet. When he spoke, his voice was as smooth and rich as honey, dripping with charm. "My lord," he began, "I come to speak of a matter most dear to my heart. Your daughter, Juliet." Lord Capulet's bushy eyebrows shot up, disappearing into his hairline. He had long hoped for a suitable match for his beloved child, and Paris was certainly a catch. Yet a father's protective instinct gave him pause, as tangible as a hand on his chest. "Ah, Paris," he replied, clapping the young man on the shoulder with a force that nearly buckled the Count's knees. "Juliet is still but a flower in bud. Give her time to bloom. Court her at the ball tonight. Win her affection. If you can capture her heart, you'll have my blessing." Paris nodded eagerly, his eyes already glazing over with visions of Juliet on his arm. As he took his leave, Lord Capulet turned his attention back to the preparations, muttering under his breath, "Where is that dolt of a servant? He needs to deliver the invitations." The hapless servant in question was at that very moment wandering the streets of Verona, lost in a maze of his own making. A crumpled list of names was clutched in his sweaty palm, the parchment soft and worn from constant handling. His face was a mask of confusion and growing panic as he stared at the unintelligible scribbles before him, each letter dancing mockingly before his eyes. Fate, in its infinite wisdom and occasional sense of humor, led the servant's steps to cross paths with Romeo and his friends. "Good sir," the servant pleaded, desperation evident in his voice, which cracked like dry kindling. "Might you help a poor soul? I cannot read, and I must deliver these invitations." Romeo, his earlier melancholy, momentarily forgotten in the face of another's distress, took pity on the man. As he read aloud the names on the list, each syllable crisp and clear, A plan began to form in his mind. This chance encounter had provided them with the very key they needed to unlock the doors of the Capulet Ball. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, long shadows stretched across Verona's cobblestone streets like grasping fingers. Romeo, Benvolio, and Mercutio hurried home to prepare for their grand adventure, their footsteps echoing with possibility. The night air crackled with anticipation, as if the very stars were holding their breath. In the gathering darkness, destiny awaited, its presence as palpable as a whisper in the ear. As Romeo donned his mask, his heart began to race, a mix of excitement and trepidation coursing through his veins. Little did he know that beyond the Capulet's threshold, his entire world was about to change forever. The Capulet mansion loomed ahead, its windows ablaze with light, the sound of music and laughter spilling out into the night. Romeo hesitated for just a moment, his hand on the ornate door knocker. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever lay ahead. With one final glance at his friends, he pushed open the door, stepping into a whirlwind of color and sound that would alter the course of his life. The Capulet mansion stood transformed, a scene of grandeur and revelry. Guests in elaborate masks and costumes filled its halls, their laughter and chatter echoing through the air. The scent of perfume and spiced wine mingled, creating an intoxicating atmosphere that seemed to pulse with life. Into this whirlwind of color and sound stepped Romeo, Benvolio, and Mercutio. Their disguises allowed them to blend seamlessly with the crowd, hearts pounding with the thrill of their daring infiltration. Romeo's eyes darted about, searching for Rosalind, the object of his recent infatuation. But fate, that fickle mistress, had other plans for the young Montague. Across the room, a vision in white caught Romeo's attention. It was Juliet, the young daughter of Lord Capulet, her beauty outshining even the most ornate masks in the room. She moved with the grace of a swan, her dark hair cascading down her back like a waterfall of silk. Romeo felt his heart skip a beat, Rosalind all but forgotten in an instant. Juliet, too, found her gaze drawn to the mysterious masked stranger. Her mother, Lady Capulet, was busy introducing her to potential suitors, but Juliet's attention was elsewhere. She felt a pull towards Romeo, like a moth to a flame, an inexplicable force drawing her in. As if guided by an invisible hand, Romeo made his way through the crowd. The sea of revelers seemed to part before him, clearing a path to Juliet. When their eyes met, it was as if time stood still. The music faded to a distant hum, the chatter of the crowd muffled by the thundering of their hearts. "Would my lady care to dance?" Romeo asked, his voice barely above a whisper, yet clear as a bell to Juliet's ears. Juliet's reply came in the form of a shy smile and an extended hand. As they began to move together, the rest of the world faded away. Their dance was a conversation without words, each step in turn speaking volumes. The heat of their bodies, the brush of fabric, the gentle pressure of hands, every touch was electric, charged with unspoken emotion. "If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine," Romeo said, his eyes never leaving Juliet's, "the gentle fine is this. My lips, two blushing pilgrims, ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss." Juliet's cheeks flushed, her heart racing. "Good pilgrim," she replied, her voice soft but steady, "you do wrong your hand too much. For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss." Their flirtatious exchange continued, each word drawing them closer together. The air between them crackled with tension, thick with desire and the thrill of newfound love. Finally, unable to resist any longer, Romeo leaned in and stole a kiss. It was brief but electric, sending shivers down both their spines. In that moment, it felt as if the stars themselves had aligned just for them. Their moment of bliss was interrupted by the shrill voice of Juliet's nurse calling her away. As Juliet reluctantly pulled away, both she and Romeo felt a sense of loss, as if a part of them had been torn away. The world came rushing back, the noise and heat of the ball suddenly overwhelming. As the night wore on, the cruel hand of fate revealed its cards. Romeo learned from a servant that the girl who had captured his heart was none other than a Capulet. The news hit him like a physical blow, his stomach churning with a mix of despair and defiance. Juliet, too, discovered the bitter truth from her nurse. Her newfound love was a Montague, her family's sworn enemy. The revelation left her reeling, torn between duty and desire. Meanwhile, across the room, trouble was brewing. Tybalt, Juliet's hot-headed cousin, had recognized Romeo despite his mask, his face contorted with rage, his hand instinctively reaching for his sword. The air around him seemed to crackle with barely contained violence. "Uncle!" Tybalt called out, approaching Lord Capulet. "That villain Romeo is here. Let me teach him a lesson he won't soon forget." But Lord Capulet, ever mindful of his duties as a host, held up a hand to stop Tybalt. "Peace, nephew," he said firmly, his voice cutting through Tybalt's anger like a knife. "He shall be endured. We'll have no bloodshed in this house tonight." Tybalt's eyes flashed dangerously, but he bit back his retort. He might obey for now, but his thirst for vengeance would not be so easily quenched. The tension in his body was palpable, like a coiled spring ready to unleash at any moment. As the ball drew to a close and the guests began to depart, Romeo and Juliet found themselves pulled in opposite directions. Yet their hearts remained intertwined, their newfound love a flame too bright to be extinguished by mere family feuds. They left the ball changed, their worlds forever altered by a single night of magic and romance. Romeo slipped away into the night, his heart pounding, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. The cool night air did nothing to calm the fire in his veins. As he made his way through the darkened streets of Verona, a single thought consumed him. He had to see Juliet again, no matter the cost. With each step, his resolve grew stronger, his love burning brighter than the stars above. Little did he know that this night was just the beginning of a tale that would shake the very foundations of Verona itself. Romeo's mind was consumed by thoughts of Juliet. His heart burned with a newfound love that he couldn't shake. The memory of her at the Capulet ball haunted him, driving him to take reckless action. Under the cover of darkness, he slipped away from his searching friends Mercutio and Benvolio and made his way to the Capulet orchard. The night air was thick and heavy, laden with the sweet perfume of blooming flowers. It seemed to mirror the intoxicating effect Juliet had on him, making his head spin and his pulse quicken. Each step he took through the shadows felt like a thunderclap in the quiet night. Leaves crunched beneath his feet, and he winced at every sound, fearing discovery at any moment. Yet the promise of seeing Juliet again drove him forward. The stone walls of the Capulet mansion loomed before him, imposing and forbidding. Romeo, usually so confident, felt small and vulnerable in their shadow. But as he approached Juliet's balcony, a surge of determination washed over him. The moonlight bathed the garden in an ethereal glow, transforming the ordinary scene into something out of a dream. Romeo's eyes darted around, taking in every detail: the rough bark of the trees, the cool grass beneath his feet, the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. All of it seemed heightened, more vivid than ever before. Suddenly, a soft light spilled from above. Romeo's breath caught in his throat as Juliet emerged onto her balcony. She was a vision, her silhouette etched against the warm glow from her room. The sight of her made his heart race even faster, and he pressed himself against the trunk of a nearby tree, drinking in her beauty. Unaware of his presence, Juliet began to speak. Her voice, clear and melodious, carried easily in the still night air. "Oh, Romeo, Romeo," she sighed, her words dripping with longing. "Why must you be Romeo?" As Juliet continued her soliloquy, Romeo listened, spellbound. Her words painted a picture of a love so pure and true that it transcended the ancient feud between their families. She spoke of names and their meaninglessness in the face of true feeling, her voice rising and falling with the passion of her convictions. "What's in a name?" Juliet mused, her fingers trailing along the balcony railing. "That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet." Unable to contain himself any longer, Romeo stepped out from the shadows. His legs trembled beneath him, and his voice shook as he called out, "I take thee at thy word. Call me but love, and I'll be new baptized. Henceforth, I never will be Romeo." Juliet started, her hand flying to her chest. For a heartbeat, she stood frozen, her eyes wide with shock and embarrassment. But as she gazed down at Romeo, bathed in moonlight and looking up at her with adoration. Her fear melted away. What followed was a passionate exchange, their words intertwining like vines climbing the walls of the orchard. They spoke of love and devotion, their voices hushed but intense. Romeo's poetic declarations matched Juliet's earlier soliloquy, his comparisons of her to the sun painting, vivid pictures in the night air. As they talked, a plan began to form. Their love, so new and yet so all-consuming, demanded action. They would marry in secret, they decided, their union a balm to heal the rift between their warring families. The danger of their situation only added fuel to the fire of their passion. "I'll send a messenger to you tomorrow," Juliet whispered, her voice a mix of excitement and caution, "to learn of your plans for our wedding." Romeo nodded eagerly, already envisioning their future together. "I'll arrange everything with Friar Lawrence," he promised, his mind racing with possibilities. As they continued to talk, the night seemed to both stretch on forever and pass in the blink of an eye. They discussed their fears and hopes, the intensity of their sudden love, and the obstacles they would face. But in that moment, under the watchful eyes of the stars, nothing seemed impossible. All too soon, the first hints of dawn began to color the sky. Reluctantly, Romeo and Juliet prepared to part. Their goodbye was bittersweet, filled with promises and longing glances. As Romeo began his descent from the orchard, Juliet called out to him one last time, "Good night, good night. Parting is such sweet sorrow that I shall say good night till it be morrow." With those words echoing in his ears, Romeo slipped away into the fading darkness. His heart was full of love, his mind fixed on the promise of tomorrow. Both he and Juliet were already counting the moments until they would meet again, their separation a physical ache that only intensified their desire to be together. As Romeo made his way back through the orchard, the sky began to lighten. The first streaks of pink and gold painted the horizon, heralding the arrival of a new day. But with the dawn came a growing sense of unease. Romeo couldn't shake the feeling that their secret love was about to face its first real test. What challenges would this new day bring, and would their love be strong enough to withstand them? The first light of dawn breaks over Verona. The sky is painted in hues of pink and gold, signaling the start of a new day. Romeo's heart pounds with anticipation as he makes his way through the quiet streets towards Friar Lawrence's cell. The cool morning air carries the sweet scent of blooming flowers and freshly baked bread, a stark contrast to the fire burning in his chest. His footsteps echo softly against the cobblestones, each step bringing him closer to his destiny. Thoughts of Juliet consume him, her radiant smile and gentle touch etched into his mind. He reaches the friar's dwelling, a modest stone building nestled among fragrant herb gardens, and pauses for a moment to catch his breath. Inside, Friar Lawrence tends to his medicinal herbs, his weathered hands moving with practiced ease. The room is filled with an earthy aroma of dried plants and incense, creating a sense of calm that Romeo's entrance quickly disrupts. The young man bursts in, breathless and flushed, his eyes wild with excitement. "My dear boy," the friar exclaims, setting aside a bundle of lavender, "what brings you here at this early hour?" Romeo's words tumble out in a rush, his voice trembling with emotion. "Father, I've found love, true love. I must marry Juliet Capulet, and I need your help." The friar's bushy eyebrows rise, his expression a mix of concern and amusement. "Juliet Capulet? But wasn't it just yesterday you were pining for Rosalind?" Romeo shakes his head vigorously, his dark curls bouncing. "That was a mere shadow, a fleeting fancy. This love for Juliet, it's like the sun breaking through storm clouds, warming every part of me." As Friar Lawrence listens, his fingers absently trace the spine of an old book. He weighs Romeo's words carefully, remembering the boy's past heartaches and impulsive nature. The friar's wise eyes study Romeo's face, searching for any sign of doubt. "Love is a delicate flower, Romeo," he says softly. "It needs time and care to bloom fully. Are you certain this isn't just another passing infatuation?" Romeo's eyes flash with determination, his voice steady and sure. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Father. Juliet is my soulmate, my other half. Without her, I'm incomplete." The friar sighs, a small smile tugging at his lips. He sees the earnestness in Romeo's face, the depth of emotion in his voice. An idea begins to form in his mind. Perhaps this union could be the key to ending the long-standing feud between the Montagues and Capulets. "Very well," he says at last. "I will help you. But remember, my boy, that love, like a sapling, needs nurturing to grow strong. Be patient, be kind, and above all, be wise." Meanwhile, across the city, Juliet paces in her room, her silk nightgown rustling softly with each step. She twists a strand of her long hair around her finger, her eyes constantly darting to the window. The wait for news from Romeo is almost unbearable, each minute feeling like an eternity. Finally, she hears the familiar shuffling steps of her nurse approaching. The door creaks open, and the plump, motherly woman enters, her face flushed from her journey. "Well?" Juliet demands, her voice trembling with anticipation. "What news from Romeo?" The nurse, her eyes twinkling with mischief, takes her time settling into a chair. She fans herself dramatically, complaining of the heat in her aching feet. Juliet's patience wears thin, her hands clenching and unclenching at her sides. "Oh, child," the nurse finally says, her voice filled with warmth. "Your Romeo has arranged it all. You are to be married this very afternoon at Friar Lawrence's cell." Juliet's face lights up like the sun breaking through clouds. She throws her arms around the nurse, laughing and crying all at once. The rest of the morning passes in a blur of preparation and nervous excitement. As the afternoon sun reaches its peak, Romeo and Juliet meet at the friar's cell. The small room is filled with the scent of burning candles and fresh flowers. Friar Lawrence stands before them, his weathered face solemn yet kind. The ceremony is brief but beautiful, the young lovers' eyes never leaving each other as they exchange vows. Their voices tremble with emotion, their hands clasped tightly together. As Friar Lawrence pronounces them husband and wife, it feels as if the whole world has fallen away, leaving only Romeo and Juliet in a bubble of pure joy. After the ceremony, the friar pulls them aside, his expression serious. "Remember, my children, that passion must be tempered with wisdom. Keep your marriage a secret for now, until the time is right to reveal it. And above all, love each other with patience and understanding." Romeo and Juliet nod, their faces glowing with happiness. They part reluctantly, each returning to their respective homes, their hearts full of anticipation for the night to come when they will consummate their marriage. As they leave the friar's cell, stepping out into the warm afternoon sun, both Romeo and Juliet feel the weight of their secret. They exchange one last loving glance before going their separate ways, their minds filled with dreams of their future together. But as the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across Verona, an uneasy feeling settles in the pit of Romeo's stomach. The streets seem unusually quiet, the air thick with tension. In the distance, he hears raised voices and the clang of metal against metal. His heart races as he realizes the sound is coming from the direction of the town square. Romeo quickens his pace, torn between his desire to return to Juliet and his growing concern for the commotion ahead. As he rounds the corner, his blood runs cold at the sight before him. Swords flash in the fading light, angry shouts fill the air, and there, in the center of it all, stands Tybalt, Juliet's cousin, his face contorted with rage. The peace of their secret wedding shatters like glass as Romeo realizes that violence has once again erupted in the streets of Verona, threatening to tear apart everything he holds dear. The tranquil aftermath of Romeo and Juliet's clandestine wedding was short-lived. Violence erupted in the streets of Verona, shattering the newfound peace between the star-crossed lovers. The sun beat down mercilessly on the cobblestone streets, its heat mirroring the simmering rage in Tybalt's heart. He stalked through the town square, his eyes darting from face to face, searching for the one who had dared to trespass at the Capulet ball. The weight of his sword at his hip was a constant reminder of the challenge he longed to issue, its presence both a comfort and a temptation. As the day wore on, the air grew thick with tension, like a storm about to break. The townsfolk moved quickly, sensing the impending conflict. It was then that Tybalt's restless wandering brought him face to face with Romeo's companions, Mercutio and Benvolio. "Well, well," Tybalt sneered, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The metal was warm beneath his touch, eager to be drawn. "If it isn't Romeo's lapdogs, where's your master, boys? Hiding behind his mother's skirts?" Mercutio, never one to back down from a challenge, stepped forward. His wit was as sharp as any blade, and he wielded it with deadly precision. "Tybalt, you rat catcher," he taunted, a mischievous glint in his eye. "The only thing Romeo's hiding from is your foul breath. When's the last time you washed that mouth of yours? It smells like you've been kissing cats." The exchange of insults continued, each barb more pointed than the last. The square buzzed with energy, onlookers gathering to witness the verbal sparring match. The air crackled with anticipation, like kindling waiting for a spark. It was into this powder keg of emotions that Romeo strolled, his heart light with the joy of his recent nuptials. The smile on his face faltered as he took in the scene before him, the happiness in his eyes giving way to concern. The world seemed to slow around him, the sounds of the square fading to a dull roar as he realized the gravity of the situation. Tybalt's gaze locked onto Romeo like a hawk spotting a mouse. "There you are, villain," he spat, drawing his sword with a metallic hiss that cut through the air. "Draw your weapon and face me like a man." Romeo, his mind still clouded by thoughts of love and unity, raised his hands in a gesture of peace. His voice was steady, but his heart raced. "Tybalt, I bear you no ill will. We are kin now, though you know it not. I cannot fight you." His words hung in the air like mist, confusing Tybalt and infuriating Mercutio. The latter saw Romeo's refusal not as an act of peace, but as a stain on their honor. "Romeo, you soft-hearted fool!" Mercutio cried, pushing past his friend. His face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. "If you won't defend our honor, then I shall." With a flourish, he drew his own sword, the blade glinting in the sunlight like a sliver of lightning. What followed was a dance of death, Mercutio and Tybalt circling each other like wolves. Their swords clashed with a sound like thunder, sparks flying with each impact. Mercutio's agility matched Tybalt's strength, neither able to gain the upper hand. The crowd gasped and cheered, caught up in the deadly spectacle. "Come, sir," Mercutio taunted between blows, his breath coming in short gasps. "Show me this cat-like agility you're so proud of." Tybalt growled in response, redoubling his efforts. The fight moved across the square, onlookers scattering to avoid the flashing blades. The air was filled with the sound of steel on steel and the heavy breathing of the combatants. Romeo, his heart pounding with fear for his friend, tried to intervene. "Stop this madness," he pleaded, stepping between the combatants with arms outstretched. His voice was drowned out by the clash of swords and the roar of the crowd. It was this act of peace that led to tragedy. In the confusion, Tybalt's blade found its mark, slipping under Romeo's arm to pierce Mercutio's chest. Time seemed to stand still as Mercutio stumbled back, his face a mask of shock and pain. The crowd fell silent, the only sound the ragged breathing of the wounded man. "I am hurt," he gasped, looking down at the spreading red stain on his shirt. His eyes, once full of mirth, now burned with a final, bitter anger. "A plague on both your houses!" he cried, his voice growing weaker with each repetition. "A plague on both your houses!" With these final words, Mercutio collapsed to the ground, his life ebbing away like the tide. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of his final, rattling breath. Romeo stood frozen, his mind struggling to comprehend the scene before him. In the span of a heartbeat, his joy had turned to ashes in his mouth. As the reality of Mercutio's death sank in, a terrible rage took hold of him. It was as if a fire had been lit inside him, consuming all thoughts of peace and love. With a roar of anguish that seemed to shake the very foundations of Verona, Romeo turned on Tybalt. "This day's black fate on more days doth depend," he snarled, drawing his sword. The metal sang as it left its sheath, a high, keening note of vengeance. "This but begins the woe others must end." The fight that followed was a blur of steel and fury. Romeo, driven by grief and anger, fought with a ferocity that caught Tybalt off guard. Their swords sang a deadly song, the clash of metal on metal echoing through the square. The crowd watched in horrified fascination as the two men battled, their movements a deadly dance of thrust and parry. In the end, it was Romeo's blade that found its mark. Tybalt fell, his life's blood staining the cobblestones red. The sound of his body hitting the ground seemed to echo in the sudden silence that fell over the square. As if summoned by the violence, the citizens of Verona flooded into the square, followed closely by the prince. The scene that greeted them was one of chaos and death. Two bodies lying still on the ground, and Romeo standing over them, his sword dripping with blood. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the acrid smell of fear. Benvolio, the sole witness untouched by the madness, stepped forward. His voice shook as he recounted the tale of Tybalt's challenge, of Mercutio's fall, and of Romeo's desperate act of vengeance. As he spoke, the weight of the tragedy settled over the crowd like a shroud, a grim reminder of the cost of their long-standing feud. As Benvolio's words faded, all eyes turned to the prince. His face was a mask of stone, unreadable as he surveyed the scene before him. The crowd held its breath, waiting for his judgment. Romeo, still gripping his bloodied sword, felt a chill run down his spine as the prince's gaze fell upon him. In that moment, he knew that his fate, and the fate of Verona itself, hung in the balance. Prince Aeschylus stood before the gathered crowd, his face etched with grim determination. The air crackled with tension as he prepared to pass judgment on Romeo, having heard the details of the fight and the tragic deaths of Mercutio and Tybalt. The square was packed. A sea of anxious faces turned towards the prince. The cobblestones beneath their feet seemed to pulse with the collective heartbeat of Verona. Sweat beaded on foreheads despite the cool air, a testament to the gravity of the moment. Romeo Montague, the prince's voice boomed, cutting through the hushed whispers like a knife. You are hereby banished from Verona. The words hung in the air for a moment before a wave of reaction swept through the crowd. Gasps, cries, and murmurs rose like a tide. The prince's next words were almost lost in the commotion. Should you return, your life will be forfeit. The Montagues' faces showed visible relief, a weight lifting from their shoulders. Their son would live. The Capulets, however, were a stark contrast. Their faces contorted with rage, voices rising in protest, demanding harsher punishment. For Romeo, the world tilted on its axis. Banishment. The word echoed in his mind, each repetition a hammer blow to his heart. His legs felt weak, his vision blurred. He stumbled away from the square, the voices of the crowd fading into a dull roar in his ears. His feet carried him, unbidden, to Friar Lawrence's cell. The familiar scent of herbs and candle wax did nothing to calm his racing heart. Banished, he cried, his voice cracking like dry wood. Friar, do you not see? To be banished from Verona is to be banished from Juliet, from life itself. The friar's face, usually a picture of serenity, was creased with worry. Peace, young Romeo, he said, his gentle voice a balm to Romeo's raw nerves. This banishment is a mercy compared to death. You live, and where there is life, there is hope. But Romeo's pain ran deep, like a wound that refused to close. The friar counseled patience, urging Romeo to flee to Mantua and wait for the storm to pass. But how could he be patient when every moment away from Juliet felt like an eternity? Meanwhile, in her chamber, Juliet paced like a caged bird. The soft swish of her skirts against the stone floor was the only sound in the room. Her heart fluttered with anticipation, her mind filled with thoughts of her wedding night. She was oblivious to the tragedy that had unfolded in the streets below. The sudden arrival of her nurse shattered her reverie. "Oh, Juliet!" the woman wailed, her face a mask of sorrow. "Tybalt is dead, and Romeo is banished." The words hit Juliet like physical blows. She reeled, her hand flying to her throat as if to stop the cry that threatened to escape. Her cousin dead, her husband banished? It was too much to comprehend. Grief and fear warred within her, leaving her dizzy and breathless. Her world, so recently filled with the promise of love, now seemed as fragile as spun glass. As night fell, a shadow moved across Juliet's balcony. Romeo, risking everything, had come to her. Their reunion was a bittersweet symphony of passion and sorrow. In the sanctuary of Juliet's chamber, they consummated their marriage, their bodies speaking the love their words could not fully express. But the approaching dawn was a merciless reminder of their limited time. The first pale streaks of light in the sky were like a countdown to their separation. Romeo prepared to leave for Mantua, his heart heavy with the weight of their uncertain future. Their farewell was a tapestry of whispered promises and desperate embraces. Romeo's hands cupped Juliet's face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "I'll find a way back to you," he vowed, his voice thick with emotion. "Distance cannot dim my love." Juliet's tears glistened in the pale light of dawn. "Every day without you will be an eternity," she whispered, her fingers clutching at his shirt. "But I'll wait, my love. I'll wait for you." With one last, lingering kiss, Romeo descended from the balcony. Juliet watched him disappear into the shadows, her heart breaking anew with each step he took away from her. Just as Romeo vanished from sight, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside Juliet's room. Lady Capulet's voice called out, "Juliet, are you awake, child?" Juliet hastily wiped away her tears, her mind racing. As she turned to face the door, a chill ran down her spine. Something in her mother's tone, an undercurrent of excitement mixed with determination, told her that more changes were coming. What new challenge would she have to face now that Romeo was gone? The door began to open, and Juliet braced herself for whatever news her mother brought. Little did she know, Lord Capulet had made a decision in the wake of Tybalt's death, a decision that would alter the course of many lives, including her own. The death of Tybalt cast a dark shadow over Verona. In its wake, Lord Capulet made a decision that would alter the course of many lives. The once lively Capulet mansion now stood silent, its halls filled with an oppressive quiet, broken only by the occasional muffled sob. Lord Capulet's heavy footsteps echoed through the grand hall, each step a testament to the burden he carried. His face, usually proud and commanding, now bore the marks of worry and sleepless nights. Unbeknownst to him, his daughter Juliet's heart beat for another. Her secret marriage to Romeo, heir of the rival Montague family, lay hidden beneath layers of family hatred and misunderstanding. Lord Capulet's voice, tinged with desperation, broke the silence. "Paris," he called, summoning the young count to his study. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on the walls as the two men sat across from each other. 3 days, Lord Capulet declared, his words hanging heavy in the air. "In 3 days, Juliet shall be your bride." Paris nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "And she will obey your wishes?" he asked, doubt creeping into his voice like a vine. Lord Capulet's eyes flashed with determination. "Of course," he assured, his words ringing hollow in the dim room. "My daughter knows her duty." As dusk painted the sky in fiery hues, Lord and Lady Capulet approached Juliet's chambers. The air grew thick with tension, their forced cheer grating against the somber atmosphere. Juliet, her face pale as moonlight, felt her world crumble at their words. "No," she whispered, her voice growing stronger with each repetition. "No, I will not marry Paris." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sudden eruption of Lord Capulet's fury. His face turned crimson, veins pulsing at his temples as he towered over his daughter. "Ungrateful wretch," he roared, his words sharp as knives. "You'll marry Paris, or by God, I'll drag you to the church myself." Lady Capulet stood by, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. When Juliet turned to her, eyes pleading for support, she found only icy indifference. Desperate and alone, Juliet sought comfort from her nurse, the woman who had been more mother to her than her own. But even here she found no solace. The nurse's round face creased with worry as she advised Juliet to forget Romeo and marry Paris. "Sweet child," the nurse cooed, her words dripping with misguided kindness. "Romeo is as good as dead to you now. Paris is a fine match, a better match. Your marriage to him would be more honorable than your secret union with Romeo." Juliet felt as if the floor had opened beneath her, plunging her into an abyss of betrayal and despair. She nodded mechanically, forcing a smile that never reached her eyes, but inside her resolve hardened like steel. She would remain faithful to Romeo, come what may. As night fell, casting long shadows across her room, Juliet made her decision. With nowhere else to turn, she would seek help from Friar Lawrence. He alone knew the truth of her marriage to Romeo, and in him lay her last hope for salvation. Wrapping a cloak tightly around her shoulders, Juliet slipped out into the night. The streets of Verona were quiet, the cobblestones gleaming dully in the moonlight. With each step towards the friar's cell, Juliet's determination grew. Her heart raced, matching the frantic pace of her thoughts. As she hurried through the winding streets, a desperate plan began to form in her mind. If Friar Lawrence couldn't help her, there was only one escape left. Her hand trembled as it brushed against the small vial hidden in the folds of her cloak. Would she have the courage to use it? Juliet raced through the winding streets of Verona, her heart pounding in her chest. Desperation fueled her steps as she made her way to Friar Lawrence's cell, the threat of taking her own life weighing heavily on her mind. The cobblestones echoed beneath her feet, matching the frantic rhythm of her thoughts. Sweat beaded on her brow, and her breath came in short gasps as she finally reached the friar's door. She burst in, startling the old man from his prayers. Friar Lawrence's weathered face creased with concern as he took in Juliet's wild-eyed appearance. "Child, what troubles you so?" he asked, his voice gentle but laced with worry. Juliet's words tumbled out like a rushing river, her fears and frustrations pouring forth. The friar listened intently, the weight of responsibility for the secret marriage pressing down on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. As Juliet's tale unfolded, the gravity of the situation became clear. The air in the small cell grew thick with tension, and the flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the walls, mirroring the darkness of their predicament. Friar Lawrence's mind raced, searching for a solution. Suddenly, an idea struck him like a bolt of lightning. He shuffled to a dusty shelf, his robes rustling in the silence. With trembling hands, he retrieved a small, ornate vial. The glass caught the dim light, its contents shimmering with promise and danger. "This potion," he explained, his voice low and urgent, "will induce a death-like sleep for 42 hours. Take it the night before your wedding to Paris, and you'll appear as still as stone, with no pulse and no color in your cheeks." Juliet's eyes widened, a mix of hope and fear dancing in their depths. The friar continued, painting a vivid picture of their plan. He would send a letter to Romeo and Mantua, explaining every detail. When the potion's effects wore off, Romeo would come to the crypt, and together they could escape to a new life. As the friar spoke, the cell seemed to fade away. Juliet could almost feel the warmth of Romeo's embrace, taste the sweet air of Mantua on her lips. But doubt crept in like a chilling mist, sending shivers down her spine. "But friar," she whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind, "to lie in a tomb surrounded by death, it terrifies me." The friar's kind eyes met hers, steady and reassuring as a lighthouse in a storm. "Fear not, child. Love is stronger than death itself. This is your path to freedom from an unwanted marriage and your family's control." Juliet's fingers closed around the vial, the cool glass a stark contrast to her feverish skin. It felt like holding her fate in her hand. With a deep breath that seemed to fill the entire room, she nodded, determination replacing fear in her eyes. The journey home was a blur of conflicting emotions. Juliet's heart raced with anticipation and dread in equal measure. Upon arrival, she donned a mask of repentance, like a skilled actress taking the stage. She approached her father, her words dripping with false sweetness as she agreed to marry Paris. Lord Capulet's face lit up like a midsummer sun, his joy palpable as he moved the wedding forward by a day, unknowingly adding urgency to the friar's plan. That night, alone in her chamber, Juliet faced her moment of truth. The vial sat on her bedside table, innocent-looking, yet holding the power to change everything. Shadows danced on the walls, twisting and turning like the thoughts in her mind. Juliet's imagination ran wild. She saw herself waking in the tomb, surrounded by the bones of her ancestors, the fresh corpse of Tybalt nearby. The thought sent icy tendrils of fear through her body, threatening to paralyze her. But then, like a warm breeze cutting through a fog, thoughts of Romeo filled her mind. His smile bright as the morning sun, his touch gentle as a butterfly's wing, the sound of his voice whispering words of love, sweeter than any music. The alternative, a loveless marriage to Paris, loomed like a prison sentence, its cold bars threatening to trap her forever. With trembling hands, Juliet reached for the vial. The cool glass pressed against her lips, and she paused for a heartbeat. Then, gathering all her courage, she tilted her head back and drank. The potion slid down her throat, tasting of bitter herbs and sweet dreams. As sleep began to claim her, Juliet's last thoughts were of Romeo. She clung to her love for him like a drowning sailor to a piece of driftwood, trusting in Friar Lawrence's plan and the power of their bond to carry her through the darkness that awaited. Her eyelids grew heavy, the room around her fading into a hazy blur. As consciousness slipped away, a single tear rolled down Juliet's cheek, glistening in the moonlight that streamed through her window. The night wore on, silent and still. Juliet lay motionless on her bed, her chest barely rising and falling with shallow breaths. The vial, now empty, rolled forgotten to the floor, coming to rest beneath the bed. The first rays of dawn began to creep across the sky, painting the world in soft hues of pink and gold. Soon the household would stir, and Juliet's fate would be sealed. But would the friar's plan unfold as hoped, or would tragedy await when she finally opened her eyes? The sun had barely peeked over the horizon, casting a soft glow through the windows of the Capulet mansion. It was in this early light that Juliet's nurse entered her chamber to wake the young bride. The room was still, filled with the gentle hush of dawn. Soft shadows danced on the walls as the nurse approached Juliet's bed, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The air was heavy with the scent of night-blooming jasmine, wafting in from the garden below. As the nurse drew closer, her heart skipped a beat. Juliet lay motionless, her skin pale as moonlight against the rich silk sheets. "Juliet, my sweet child, wake up," the nurse called out, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. The silence that followed was deafening. Panic seized the nurse, her hands shaking as she reached out to touch Juliet's cheek. The cold beneath her fingers sent a chill down her spine. "No, no, no," she whispered, her eyes widening in horror. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as the reality of the situation sank in. The nurse's screams shattered the morning calm, echoing through the halls of the Capulet mansion like a banshee's wail. The sound of thundering footsteps filled the air as the household stirred to life, a stark contrast to the deathly stillness in Juliet's chamber. Lord and Lady Capulet burst into the room, their faces etched with worry. The scent of fear and confusion mingled with the jasmine, creating a sickening perfume. "What is it? What's happened?" Lord Capulet demanded, his voice rough with sleep and fear. Lady Capulet pushed past him, her silk robe billowing behind her like a storm cloud. As her eyes fell upon her daughter's still form, a wail of anguish tore from her throat. She collapsed beside the bed, clutching at Juliet's lifeless hand, her body racked with sobs that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. The room quickly filled with the sounds of weeping and disbelief. Servants huddled in doorways, whispering and crossing themselves. The grief in the air was thick, almost tangible, like a heavy fog settling over the household. It clung to every surface, seeping into the very walls of the mansion. Lord Capulet stood frozen, his face ashen. The loss of Tybalt was still a fresh wound, and now this? It was too much to bear. He stumbled backward, leaning against the wall for support, his world crumbling around him. Into this scene of despair walked Paris, resplendent in his wedding finery. His smile faded as he took in the somber faces and tear-stained cheeks. The contrast between his joyful anticipation and the reality of the situation was jarring. "What's happened?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lady Capulet looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. "Juliet," she choked out. "Our Juliet is... The words hung in the air, too painful to complete. Paris pushed his way to the bedside, his face draining of color as he gazed upon his bride-to-be. He fell to his knees beside Lady Capulet, taking Juliet's other hand in his own. "No," he murmured, "this can't be." The weight of his shattered dreams seemed to press down on him, bowing his shoulders. The room fell silent, save for the soft sounds of weeping. It was as if all the joy and hope for the future had been sucked out of the world, leaving only a hollow shell of grief behind. The morning light, once soft and promising, now seemed harsh and unforgiving. Friar Lawrence arrived shortly after, his weathered face a mask of concern. He moved through the room with quiet authority, gently examining Juliet. Inside, his heart raced with the knowledge of his plan, but outwardly he remained calm, a steady presence in the storm of emotions. "My lord, my lady," he said softly, addressing the Capulets, "I know your grief is great, but we must think of what comes next. Juliet must be laid to rest with the honor befitting her station." His words, though gentle, cut through the fog of despair like a knife. Lord Capulet nodded numbly, unable to form words. Lady Capulet clung to her husband, her body racked with sobs that seemed to echo the pain of every mother who had ever lost a child. "The family tomb," Friar Lawrence continued gently, "it is where she belongs." The finality of these words hung heavy in the air, a somber reminder of the cruel hand of fate. And so it was decided. The household moved in a daze, preparing for a funeral instead of a wedding. The air was thick with the scent of incense and the sound of mournful prayers. Laughter and joy were replaced by hushed whispers and stifled sobs. Paris, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow, insisted on accompanying Juliet's body to the tomb. As they lowered her into her final resting place, he scattered a handful of flowers over her still form. "Farewell, my love," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. The flowers fell like tears, a last tribute to a love that never had the chance to bloom. Meanwhile, Friar Lawrence's mind raced with the urgency of the situation. He pulled Friar John aside, pressing a letter into his hands. "This must reach Romeo in Mantua with all haste," he urged. "The very fate of these star-crossed lovers depends on it." The weight of his secret plan pressed down on him, a burden he alone could bear. Friar John nodded solemnly, tucking the letter into his robes. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As he set out for Mantua, word spread of a plague outbreak in the city. The gates were barred, and no one was allowed to enter or leave. The news hit Friar John like a physical blow, the implications of this setback dawning on him with terrifying clarity. Friar John returned to Friar Lawrence, his face etched with worry. "I could not deliver the letter," he explained. "The quarantine." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their consequences. Friar Lawrence's heart sank. He knew he must act quickly, but before he could formulate a plan, another piece fell into place. Balthazar, Romeo's loyal servant, had witnessed Juliet's funeral procession. Unaware of the grand deception, he set out for Mantua, his heart heavy with the news he must deliver. The road stretched out before him, each step taking him closer to a moment that would change everything. In Mantua, Romeo paced restlessly, his exile weighing heavily upon him. The room felt like a cage, the walls closing in with each passing moment. When Balthazar arrived, his face grave and eyes downcast, Romeo's world shattered. "Speak, man," Romeo demanded, his voice trembling. "What news from Verona?" The air crackled with tension as he waited for Balthazar's response. Balthazar's words fell like hammer blows. "Your Lady Juliet, she lies in the Capulet tomb. I saw her laid to rest with my own eyes." Each word was a dagger, piercing Romeo's heart. Romeo staggered back as if physically struck. His mind reeled, unable to comprehend the cruel twist of fate. The world seemed to spin around him, colors blurring into a chaotic swirl. In that moment, as despair washed over him like a tidal wave, he made a fateful decision. "I will lie with thee tonight," he vowed, his voice hollow with grief. And with those words, the final act of this tragic tale was set in motion. As Romeo's world crumbled around him, a storm began to brew outside. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, mirroring the turmoil in his heart. The air grew heavy with the promise of rain, and a distant rumble of thunder echoed his anguish. Little did he know that miles away in Verona, Juliet lay in a death-like sleep, waiting for a rescue that might never come. The stage was set for a final, heart-wrenching act that would shake both families to their core. The news of Juliet's death struck Romeo like a thunderbolt. His world shattered in an instant, leaving him reeling and desperate. The news of Juliet's death struck Romeo like a thunderbolt. His world shattered in an instant, leaving him reeling and desperate. Unaware of Friar Lawrence's secret plan, Romeo's mind spiraled into darkness, each thought more painful than the last. The bustling streets of Mantua, once filled with promise, now felt suffocating. Every happy face he passed was a cruel reminder of what he'd lost. As twilight descended, casting long shadows across the cobblestones, Romeo found himself before a dilapidated apothecary shop. The air hung thick with the scent of dried herbs and decay. Inside, shelves lined with dusty vials and withered plants loomed over a gaunt figure. The shop's owner, his hollow eyes speaking volumes of his own desperation. "I need a poison," Romeo whispered, his voice cracking. "The strongest you have." The apothecary hesitated, bony fingers twitching nervously. Romeo pressed a heavy pouch of gold into the man's hands, feeling the weight of his request. "Please," he pleaded, "my need is great." With trembling hands, Romeo secured the vial of poison, its contents as dark as the thoughts swirling in his mind. The journey back to Verona passed in a blur of shadowy landscapes and muffled sounds. Trees whipped by, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers in the moonlight. Romeo's heart pounded, each beat a countdown to his reunion with Juliet. Under the cover of darkness, he slipped into the city that had once been his home. Familiar streets now felt like a labyrinth, leading him inexorably towards his fate. The air grew thick with tension as he approached the Capulet tomb, a stone sentinel guarding his heart's desire. The sound of metal on stone echoed in the night like a funeral dirge as Romeo broke through the entrance. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. Paris, Juliet's would-be husband, his face a mask of grief and anger. "You!" Paris cried, recognition flashing in his eyes. "You're the one who killed her with your banishment." Swords clashed in the moonlight, the ring of steel cutting through the silence. Romeo, consumed by sorrow and desperation, fought with the strength of a man with nothing left to lose. In a cruel twist of fate, Paris fell, his life ebbing away on the cold ground. "Lay me with Juliet," Paris gasped with his dying breath. Remorse washed over Romeo as he honored the request, carrying Paris's body into the tomb. The sight of Juliet lying peacefully took Romeo's breath away. Her beauty, unchanged by death, seemed to mock the cruelty of their fate. He approached her still form, his heart pounding with a mixture of love and anguish. "My love," he whispered, his voice breaking, "even in death, you outshine the stars." Romeo's fingers traced the contours of her face, memorizing every detail. Memories of their stolen moments together flashed through his mind. Their first meeting, the balcony scene, their secret wedding, each one a dagger to his heart. With trembling hands, Romeo uncorked the vial of poison. The liquid inside shimmered in the dim light, promising an end to his pain. He raised it to his lips, pausing for one last look at his beloved. "Death that hath sucked the honey of thy breath hath had no power yet upon thy beauty," Romeo murmured, his words a final tribute to their ill-fated love. As the poison coursed through his veins, Romeo's world began to fade. He lay down beside Juliet, their bodies intertwined one last time. In his final moments, he reflected on the power of love that had brought them together and the cruelty of fate that had torn them apart. With his last breath, Romeo whispered Juliet's name, believing that in death, they would finally be united forever. Outside the tomb, footsteps echoed in the night. A figure raced towards the Capulet crypt, desperation etched on his face. It was Friar Lawrence, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he clutched an undelivered letter. But was he already too late? Friar Lawrence's heart pounded as he raced towards the Capulet tomb. His letter to Romeo remained undelivered, a weight of dread in his pocket. The night air was thick with foreboding as the friar approached the ancient stone structure. Moonlight cast long shadows across the ground, turning familiar shapes into looming specters. The crunch of gravel under his feet seemed deafening in the eerie silence. As he entered the tomb, the chill air hit him like a physical blow. The smell of damp stone and decay filled his nostrils, making him gag. His eyes, adjusting to the gloom, swept the chamber. What he saw made his blood run cold. Romeo lay motionless beside Juliet's awakening form. Outside, the crumpled figure of Paris added to the night's grim tally. The friar's breath caught in his throat, a silent scream of despair. Juliet stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Confusion clouded her face, then recognition as she saw Friar Lawrence. "Father?" Her voice was a hoarse whisper, barely audible in the tomb's oppressive silence. As awareness dawned, her gaze shifted to Romeo. The color drained from her face, leaving her as pale as the marble statues surrounding them. "No," she breathed, her trembling hands reaching out to touch Romeo's cold cheek. "No, no, no!" The friar's own grief threatened to overwhelm him. He placed a comforting hand on Juliet's shoulder, feeling her body shake with silent sobs. "My child," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "We must—" The sound of approaching footsteps cut him off, echoing like thunderclaps in the quiet night. Panic seized him, his mind racing with the consequences of discovery. "Juliet, we must leave," he urged, tugging gently at her arm. "Come with me. I'll take you to a convent where you'll be safe." But Juliet was beyond hearing. She clung to Romeo's body, her cries muffled against his chest. The footsteps grew louder, each one like a hammer blow to the friar's resolve. Fear won out. With a last anguished look at Juliet, he fled into the night, leaving her alone with the dead. In the tomb's oppressive silence, Juliet's grief transformed. A desperate, wild hope took hold. She pressed her lips to Romeo's, searching for any trace of the poison that had taken him from her. Finding none, her eyes fell upon his dagger. The blade glinted in the moonlight, a cold comfort in her darkest hour. "Oh, happy dagger," she whispered, echoing Romeo's words from what felt like a lifetime ago. With a steady hand that belied the turmoil in her heart, she took the dagger and plunged it into her chest. Pain blossomed, sharp and immediate, but it paled in comparison to the agony of living without Romeo. As her life ebbed away, a sense of peace washed over her. In death, they would be united forever. The watch arrived moments later, followed by a somber procession of the prince, the Capulets, and the Montagues. The scene that greeted them was one of unspeakable tragedy. Romeo and Juliet lay entwined in death's embrace, while Paris's body outside the tomb spoke of an additional, unexpected loss. Balthazar and Friar Lawrence were brought before the prince, their faces etched with guilt and sorrow. The friar, his voice quavering, recounted the tale of the star-crossed lovers, their secret marriage, the well-intentioned deception, and the cruel twist of fate that had led to this moment. As the story unfolded, the faces of the Capulets and Montagues transformed. The mask of hatred they had worn for so long cracked and fell away, revealing the raw pain of parents who had lost everything to a senseless feud. Lord Capulet and Lord Montague stood face to face, seeing for the first time not an enemy, but a mirror of their own grief. In a gesture that would have seemed impossible mere hours before, they clasped hands. The touch was tentative at first, then firmed with resolve. "No more," Lord Capulet said, his voice rough with emotion. Lord Montague nodded, words failing him. They vowed to erect golden statues of Romeo and Juliet, a lasting testament to the love that had finally brought peace to Verona. The statues would stand as a reminder of the cost of hatred and the power of forgiveness. Prince Aeschylus, his own heart heavy with the loss of his kinsman Paris, delivered a final judgment. His words fell like stones in the quiet tomb, each one a rebuke and a lament. "All are punished," he declared, his gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd. "We have all played a part in this tragedy." As dawn broke over Verona, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, the two families left the tomb united in their grief. The first rays of sunlight touched the faces of Romeo and Juliet, lending them a peaceful glow. In death, they had accomplished what seemed impossible in life, bringing an end to an ancient feud and ushering in the promise of a peaceful future for Verona. The city stirred to life, unaware of the night's events. But as the news spread, a hush fell over Verona. The story of Romeo and Juliet would be told for generations to come. A cautionary tale of love and loss, of the destructive power of hatred and the redemptive force of forgiveness. And in the Capulet tomb, where shadows still lingered, two young lovers lay at peace, their love eternal, their sacrifice remembered.
This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.